Okay, we're beginning.
All right.
Okay, so now we're discussing History of Forgetfulness by Shahe Mankerian. So we start with usually looking at the cover. What is it? Do you have any thoughts about the cover of this book?
I think she meant KB. Do you have any thoughts?
KB? I'm going to call on KB.
I've gotten into the habit of that.
Yeah, I don't know. I always try to figure out how the title works with the picture that's there. And I guess I don't know, I sort of feel the person on the table, but I'm not really sure about the rest of it. I like that it's kind of not drab, because I like those colors, and drab sounds bad, but understated mostly, and then it's just got the warmth of some red and oranges, but not a lot. I do like that.
Yeah.
Almost
Well,
like a kid's drawing, though, isn't it? Like,
Yeah, I thought it was a child looking, standing on a stool, looking at the world. And that thought was kind of emphasized in his poem on 43, when he talks about the boy on the crates looking at things.
mm,
That's how I connected to it better. But I don't know.
and I do not see any information about this cover unless I'm
No.
just missing it.
There is in the thank yous somewhere he said, something about, oh, here we go. To my dear, thank you for throughout my imagine any other artist graced the cover of my first book. But I thought it was interesting that the publisher didn't have a little statement there about, you know, in the front matter about the cover illustration.
Right, yes.
Your title, yeah.
So it's a
I thought that
friend.
it was a person up high trying, and the dog represented all the things that like threaten and pursue you. But I didn't know what all these little circular things were. Were they supposed to be flowers?
Flowers,
Like,
yeah.
you
Or
think?
grenades.
Yeah, I
Oh.
saw them
Well,
as weapons or
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't get that at all. That's interesting. Wow. Okay. We will have to ask that question.
yeah.
Yeah, Helga, you're probably right to notice that poem on page 43, the boy on the
Yeah.
crates.
Yeah.
I had made a note to myself on several pages where I guess the image or the motif of climbing, climbing up higher, climbing up, sometimes, it's prurient climbing, but but then also just this idea that somehow on the cover, that table looks really precarious.
Mm,
And so the precarious nature of things in this book might be a theme that's represented in the cover.
But it's also the only safety, like where else
Oh.
can you be safe from all of these potential attacks?
Yeah.
See, that's if you thought of what was down there as an attack. But see, I saw a dog, which I've never met a dog I didn't like, and flowers. So
Oh.
it didn't resonate with me that it was something after you. I was just like, why are they away from the dog and the flowers? That's where I would be. But if it's, a vicious dog, or you don't like dogs, and if it's grenades, then that would be a completely different image.
And the dog is kind of looks like it's barking or something. Its mouth is open, And if those are grenades, there's one up by the shoulder of the figure on the stool.
That's right. Yeah.
That almost looks like a target to
Mhm.
me in a way.
Mhm.
You know
Oh.
what? The top of the cover, something has been written, like where the red is scrawled through. It looks
Right,
like there's
yes.
a word, couple of words there.
I noticed that, but I couldn't make out what the word must be.
Yeah. It looks like the word and
Yeah.
then R, and that looks like a T. Yeah.
The T, yeah.
Well, Sandy, there's so many references to snipers
Yeah,
in the book
exactly.
that might.
Yeah, I call them as bullet holes,
Oh,
like bullet holes, like on fire, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
hi, Alice.
Hey, Alice,
Mhm.
Snuck in there.
you're muted though, I think.
Late because I had the book in the car while I was in pickup line for the kids. I can't find it.
Oh,
And all I did was pick up kids and come home.
Oh, gosh.
So,
you'll have to go from memory.
I know.
Well, we were just talking about the cover and had more questions than answers, actually. So looking at kind of at the structure of the book, there's 2 sections. And I thought the quotes at the beginning of each sections were particularly interesting, both about memory and forgetting.
I thought that second one was amazing.
I did too.
Loved it. Made my husband listen to it. I can't find what page it's on though. I can't.
The second
Oh, here it
quotation.
is.
47.
47.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have not forgotten to remember. You have remembered to forget.
Yeah.
That's super interesting. But what did you think was happening between the 2 sections? Did you see a difference in the sections, or? I don't know that I did. Like they were.
There was nothing in the first section that made me smile.
There was humor. There was some humor in the second section,
Yeah,
but it was dark.
it was dark humor, but it was humor. The woman, I presume the mother, was being mistreated again and again and again. Oh, I think it's in the first section. There was one that was particularly poignant where she'd left home for 5 days,
Yes.
but he knew she'd come back to feed her
Yeah.
son.
Homecoming 5th day, page
Yeah,
44, I believe.
Yeah. 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 So there's a lot of domestic violence towards the father against the mother, but also sometimes against the
against the son. too.
speaker, the poet.
I thought in that poem on page 44 that the ending image, and it seems like there's one other poem where the last image of the poem is very resonant. And in this particular case, it ends with, on the 5th day when we got home, she had cleaned the dishes after she's been gone for 4 days, right? Wiped the table, and the kitchen seemed full of steam from the pressure cooker. And just ending on that pressure cooker, right? Building up steam, building up. I thought was a really poignant, resonant ending to that poem.
Yeah. And also what happens, I've recognized over and over in his poems is the way that he does line breaks or stanza breaks, the enjambment of, and the kitchen seemed full.
Yeah.
Of steam from the pressure cooker.
Yeah, there was a very early poem. Oh, yeah, page 14, the very first line. Father was God.
Yes.
And then it, and then comes down to, oh, Father was Godzilla.
Yes.
Which is, and they kind of conflating of those two ideas also, like God as a monster. And then you've got the sniper, which is I don't want to say like a godlike figure, but something that is seemingly omniscient and always observing the city, and everybody is conscious of trying to live, but nonetheless live under the watchful eye of the sniper.
Right.
But yeah, that line break. I mean, there's several in here we probably would take note of.
There was a poem, I think in the second section, where the title was a word that meant both sin and pity.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I don't know how to say it. Mech.
Mech.
MEKHK.
Yeah.
But
That was when they were drawing their silhouettes about the dark skin, and then there was the Egyptian girl that had the darker skin that was crying. We are born with sin, dirty and black. That poem, Alice?
Yeah, that's the one.
And there's a little bit of dark humor. He must have used a gingerbread cookie cutter for an outline early in that poem.
Is that something that's new, or is it because I've never had an issue with skin color that people are equating like black of sin or black of dirt as black of skin color? When I was a kid, I don't remember that ever, like I never ever made that correlation between thinking that the blackness of sin was just a representation, not the color. I don't know, but like I said, maybe it's just because I'm so very, very white that might not have been an issue for me.
I think I've heard that before. I think I've heard that, dirty is, kind of corresponding to darker skin.
Darker skin. Okay. Yeah. I've never come across that before.
Sinful, dark, dirty.
Did the first poem make anybody else cry?
Oh my gosh. The first poem I thought was just stellar. Yes.
Yeah. And the opening line of this book too, I thought was, it's so connected to everything else in the book. I got my schooling at the morgue. I know he's within a city that seems always under siege, which is a kind of, I don't know, it's even like you think of the morgue as a place of death where, like afterlife, but, is a house somewhat like a morgue, and by extension, can a whole city be a morgue? I just thought the opening line of that was so compelling.
Yeah, and it sets the stage for the entire book.
Yeah.
Also, like a desensitization of these horrors
Mhm.
that you see every day, and it's like his job was to clean the fingernails or clip the fingernails.
He uses fingernails a lot in various poems, I found.
Yeah, the yellow fingernails
about
of his
yellow,
father.
yeah.
And then looking at
Yeah,
his own.
exactly.
And bits of fingernails strewn about, that kind of thing.
And the line breaks on that first poem too will get you.
The other thing I thought on the first poem that was at least poignant was that his mother had insisted that he get this job in a way so that he wouldn't become one of the people brought into it in other ways.
Yeah,
You know, again, I don't have the text. I can't give you the line.
yeah, would keep
But-
the streets out of her
Yeah.
son.
Yeah.
Keep him off the streets so he wouldn't get killed, and yet he's caring for the people that had already died. Did y'all notice
then
it's all
is
in iambic? This is iambic pentameter too.
Yeah.
And then
And
at the very end, where the mothers are coming, looking for their children who are dead,
Yeah.
decapitated, and he says, it's almost as if he's saying to his mother, "Come get your son, or one who's alive."
Yeah.
I can't quote
Yeah.
the last part either.
yeah, she
But-
says, Don't look for him among the dead." That's what he says. He lives. He lives. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is a echo of the biblical story of Jesus, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Why you look for the living among the dead?
Yeah,
And then even as that last stanza, I thought this was a powerful line, Alice. I witnessed death before I could live. And it got me thinking about juxtapositions, death, life, and those kinds of any kind of contrast. And I see lots of those, I think, through the book.
Which poem are you talking about?
That's the very first one.
educating the
Educating
son.
the
Educating
son.
the son. Yeah, it's on page 12, the
11 and 12.
11
Oh,
and 12.
Okay, that's why, because I was only looking at page 11. I was like, I don't see that line that you just said. Okay.
Yeah.
But that's not iambic pentameter poem. Is it?
Well, the first line is tetrameter.
Tetrameter.
I got my
Okay,
schooling at the morgue, a summer job. My
Summer
mother
job, the
taught.
mother
Yeah, okay.
thought would keep
Yeah,
the
I mean,
streets out of the
everything's
sun, it
8
was a-
syllables.
Yeah,
Yeah, okay.
tetrameter.
I was just like, wait a minute. That's why I was like, okay, I'm looking at the wrong poem.
Oh, yeah, sorry, I said it wrong.
That's okay. I was between the two comments. I thought, well, I'm not looking at the right.
Where are you, Katie?
I was also disoriented, KB.
Sandy, you mentioned that first poem has lots of line breaks that get you.
Yeah,
What do you have in mind there?
well, like, in the third stanza, with rubbing alcohol and cotton balls, I cleaned and washed dry blood from children with no legs. Like that. I smiled because I didn't know, stanza break.
Yeah.
Another way to deal with shock. Smiled. And then let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 stanza, third line. Mothers who like doves descended slowly on their sons, decapitated corpses.
Yeah, it's kind of like withholding the punch or
Yeah,
the really effective gut punch kind of moment is on the next line.
yeah.
Always the next line. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was a really good poem. And it sets the stage so perfectly for this book.
I don't want to make too much out of this, I guess, but even the title, Educating the Son, it seems worth thinking about, like in what way is the whole book an education for the child, but then the son and the references to Jesus throughout, and sometimes the perversions of that, the kind of recasting. I think about like, what's the one poem? There's several things where things are recast in a way, like Thank God for Judas, page 57.
That was the one that I thought was wonderfully humorous.
Yeah. Or the sniper as Cupid, like recontextualizing as a way to, and maybe that's part of that shock of the first poem, to kind of deal with this world that he's living in. You can't really, I guess, face it head on. I suppose you have to, but you're also kind of recreating metaphors and ideas and words and images in some other fashion as a way to kind of cope.
Even the doves, the mothers descending like doves. I immediately, there's this picture of the dove descending as the Holy Spirit.
Right. Right.
But that's not what they're doing.
Yeah.
And he experienced all this as a child too, with a child's understanding and trying to make it, or maybe not trying, but forced to make it normal, still playing, still growing up, still going through puberty, still going to school.
What was there was one, the Lord's Prayer when he was 8 years old.
Yeah. And then again at 28, there was two of those. The monster.
Yeah, I had trouble deciding whether the monster was his father or the typical kid's monster under the bed. The father seemed like such a monster.
Yeah, maybe it works both ways, but yeah, I had the same. I think because of the poems that surround that one, it's easy to think the monster is the father, because they're in that poem's in the company of some of those other poems. So there must be they kind of rub off on each other, I guess, or we read through the lens. We read one poem through the lens of another.
You don't think of the father that way exactly when he's first introduced. I think maybe the second or the third poem was one where the father was coming home and was hoisting his belt tighter around his hernia, and one little boy's getting the slippers and the other one's starting to play the piano, so that everything will seem perfect.
But that,
so that perhaps the father will not have a angry reaction, perhaps.
I think that's the way I read that, but I could be wrong. Well, because the very next poem is the one that, father was Godzilla.
I know, and I didn't. I actually read it as a family wanting to please the father when he came home in a positive way. Oh, until I read the next poem.
Yeah.
And the next one. And but it was interesting.
And I think you have to wonder too, like in this situation where civil war and, bombs going off and snipers, that the pressure on the parents, some I think would have so much stress and, I don't know, anger, that they would direct it toward maybe their family members.
Yeah.
some people just wouldn't be able to handle it, right?
Yeah. Probably no one. But there's a poem later about, and I took it to be about his mother, about this woman is very beautiful. And then is put in the cage almost. I can't call up enough to get you there.
Well, I'm looking through all my Charles Simic books here. Yeah, I don't know if anybody else had that thought as you read this of, Charles Simic was at Belgrade, where he grew up as a kind of within this same kind of context, I guess. But there's that one poem I was looking for. It begins one of his books. It's called Evening Chess, I believe, the title. The queen held high in my father's angry hand. That's something like that's all the poem says. And it's like, where's it going to be placed? but
Yeah.
Simic has written about those childhood memories too, I guess. But it's kind of a juxtaposition of the horror of it with at the same time a kind of, I don't know how to describe it. It's the ordinariness, but also a sense of marvel at the same time. I thought one thing that was replayed throughout the book, and I thought it had a kind of interesting connection to the fullness of the book too, was the use of the idea of cinema.
Yeah.
I don't know. Anybody have any thoughts about that?
Well, there was that one where they were going to see Jaws.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And,
Mhm.
what was really scary was what was happening in the city.
Yeah.
And I thought that one was powerful. I expected, there to be more about a fish, but there wasn't. But I thought it was very well done. I can't find the page now. But
Page 72, when Jaws premiered in Beirut. Yeah, it's kind of like this juxtaposition between American fantasy horror and like
horror.
reality. This real horror.
The
When there was the
burning
death of
cargo in the
Jesus.
distance didn't derail them from going, but then someone whispered threatening was getting closer and closer. I mean, as somebody who grew up just, petrified of Jaws, I thought it was really very well done.
On
That
page
was one that I
36.
thought was humorous.
Yeah. What, KB?
I was gonna say on page 36 is the death of Jesus and Technicolor.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I love that, the first couplet. I really like that. Mother held my hand during the blackout, breathe normally. After reading that title, I'm already like not breathing normally.
Yeah, it refers to, I just remember that German Jesus, and I have no idea what they mean by that. I don't know how they depict their Jesus. So usually in Germany, it's Jesus is on the cross. So I was.
Yeah, I didn't get that either.
Yeah, but I kind of like the poem on page 41, Dear Mr. President, because he talks about the first part of the poem is how it normally is. And the second part of the poem is what happens when there is a war.
Mhm.
And so I really like that. He talks about, father playing the violin, everyone's happy, mother fries eggplant in the kitchen, and she hummed, and brother read books on the Arabian Nights. And then the speaker rolls on the Persian rug. But then a bomb explodes near the souk. Window panes shatter. The mosque collapsed on the bridge. The violin broke from the neck. Eggplants charred. Brother bled on the couch. So that indicates something happened there. And he waited for the rug to magically rise and take flight into the night. That poem really stuck with me, in particular.
There were a lot of seeming images that didn't go to you. I mean, and maybe it's just because I don't know the particular culture, but when he's talking about tiled floor and marble floors, it seems very wealthy. And yet, I mean, there are images in there where the house seems wealthy, the household, and then there's the bombs and stuff. And in my head, that just is really difficult to bring together. Because I guess I don't expect wealthy places to be bombed. I mean, obviously it is.
Well, I think in the southern type houses like Italy and Spain that I have visited, they all have tile floors or marble floors because apparently that is less expensive than trees. So that's what I was thinking, but I don't know.
Yeah, it's cooler. I mean, it's cooler too, and there's a lot because in Florida, all the floors are tiled. But I guess for some reason, I'm trying to find a poem now that I feel like when we were in his house, it just seemed like a kind of a wealthy home. And maybe it was just something, I might have been reading something else at the time that put the image in my head.
Well,
The Civil War tore up everything.
Yeah.
I was assuming it was Lebanon, that you were looking at Beirut, although there's certainly enough references to Armenians versus Turks to make you think it might have been a family that moved out as part of the diaspora. Oh, but our guidance counselor's husband, Lefty Solomon, was from Lebanon. Oh, and it was a beautiful city. It was a city with lemons and oranges dropping from trees and very cultured. And then, it was wrecked.
I think he grew up in Beirut.
I thought so too.
Which is in Lebanon, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
I had a friend in graduate school from Beirut, Lebanon. She was like, yeah, I'm from a war-torn country. I mean, I started graduate school in 1981. I was there until 1988. And I mean, she was there in part to get away. Her family wanted her to, be in a good place. And she said, I mean, it was, they had money, but they were not shielded from it.
Yeah. I guess bombs don't take into
Discriminate.
consideration who's rich or who's poor.
Helga, that poem you mentioned, Dear Mr. President,
Yes.
when you were talking about that, it reminded me of a couple of things. One was, I guess, just the cumulative effect of the poems as you read them. Like this one, in many ways is a kind of small poem compared to some of the others, but it's very effective and evocative. And it almost sounds, if you look at it in the context, there are point like maybe a couple of pages over, there's the mother's prayer, and then right after that, I think there's the other, like Lord's Prayer, age 28. So then all of a sudden, the idea of Dear Mr. President, a letter, also has a kind of prayer-like quality to it, as if the president is somebody who could answer or could help
Yeah.
in the way that God, like if you pray to God. And in that sense, maybe the poem, the kind of resonance or meaning of the poem deepens.
Because of the title. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe
Well,
so go ahead, Helga. I'm sorry.
I just wanted to say that these poems let me taste the Armenian culture and the cuisine, and most of them depict the basest existence in times of war.
Mhm.
But it seems even in this life, in the center is always some kind of food, a meal. And I like that about these poems as well.
There's a poem on page 31 called Lentils.
Mhm.
Um,
I love lentil soup. But that's probably more European in a way.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Oh, that's the other poem. At the ending of it, it says the soup was boiling. And
Yes.
it kind of reminds me of the way he ended that other poem with the pressure cooker.
Right. Yeah.
Just to kind of distill that poem down, Lentils on page 21.
31.
Or
31.
30, yeah, 31, I'm sorry. I had written a note to myself just for these three things, like scrubbing, cooking, sifting, and then ends with boiling. Just all those ing words. And so, there's he worked in the morgue in the very beginning, so there's the idea of scrubbing in a different context. But scrubbing is a way to try to get out stains, so the stain of everything that's going on around him. Cooking, Helga, it's at the center. It's just part of our life. But then there's the sifting. Like we have to sift through the rubble. We have to sift through the. In this case, of course, it's separating the pebbles from the lentils, but separating the
Pebbles
things that are
from his
not good.
shoes.
Yeah.
You mentioned fingernails that come up in this book a lot. I noticed shoes came up a lot and the soles of shoes. At one point in that poem about the morgue, he says the faces look like shoes without any soles. And I wondered what you made of that. I thought maybe, he was playing with the idea of the word soul also suggesting SOUL, but I thought it was very interesting, all the fingernails and fingers and soles and shoes.
I feel like because he was in such an abusive home and stuff that he wouldn't look up, that he was always like looking down, looking away. And so that's what he focused on, was the hands and the feet.
Oh, interesting. I didn't think about that at all, Chris. Yeah.
Page 30, that poem After the Ceasefire. The butcher removed the stray bullets from the belly of the hanging pork. But yeah, this poem has the butcher, it has the cobbler, and it has the priest. And I thought that was a little microcosm in some ways of this whole city or this childhood. And also the way in which, like, the butcher, this, you know, this kind of normal occupation, is kind of, because of all the connotations elsewhere in the book, that's kind of remade in a kind of horrific way. And then, of course, the cobbler, you know, I mean, can we ever put things back together? I don't know, cobble them back together. And then the priest, you know, the religious sensibility in a world where religion often unmakes or outright destroys. I thought the juxtaposition of all those things in that poem was really fascinating, because you see them, I think, colliding in other poems.
Mm.
If you think of even like say the sniper that keeps coming back in is a kind of butcher in a way.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Oh,
But
that's it. Huh.
so,
I think this was a poem where I was a little confused because, what is it, one or two poems before that, the butcher was nailed to something.
Different butcher, maybe.
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, page 28, the poem Hunger.
Yeah.
We found the butcher nailed to the hood of his car, hunger pangs and dripping maggots from the hanging sheep kept us awake. So there's that, you know, that's probably why it stayed with me, because the
Yeah.
imagery is so powerful. And then I got to the one on page 31 and the butcher was doing something and I was like, wait a minute, I thought he died. So just different people.
Yeah. They replaced him, KB.
Well, there were brioches between Hunger and
Yeah.
after the ceasefire, so.
Yeah.
The images, I mean, are just really powerful, because you've got stuff like a roach crawled into the barren oven. You know, there are so many, I mean, the dripping maggots and all of that.
Yeah, I have to say all that was hard for me. But I mean, I found myself, I don't know, separating from the book a little bit when there was quite a bit of that in a row. And I was just like, I get it. I get it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Please, no
I
more.
sort of had to take it in pieces too. Yeah. So
I guess the main thing that bothered me wasn't as much the blood and gore as it was the male-female thing, because I mean, it was the whole patriarchal mess was very obvious with the father,
Yeah.
but it ran all the way through the male-female relationships in school, with the boys, with looking at the you know, there was one little boy who was using the prostitute's window as his own private cinema.
Right.
Yeah.
there's the cinema again.
Yeah.
And then just none of it had any kind of human connection between male and female, except possibly what the son felt for the mother.
Mhm.
And
I agree. I felt that too, Alice.
So do you think that's because there was not any emotional tie there, or because in a time of war, things are, I don't know, distilled to their basest, most ugliest level?
Probably that, but I mean, I think there's that was in the culture, and then it was just intensified by, you know, the distress. But
Wouldn't there be a disconnect though in this kind of a situation? In order to, I would think, in order to protect yourself, you kind of have to numb yourself. And if you numb yourself to the bad things, then you numb yourself to the good things too.
Yeah.
For those of you who have ever, read any Brene Brown. So
Yeah. Plus, this Civil War started in 1975. And I don't know how old he is.
I think that's the year he was born.
He was born in 75. I think the
I was
Civil
thinking
War
that
lasted
somewhere.
until 1990. And I think he moved to America at age 12. So he had to be, what, 8, 10, 11, with these memories. And that's a time too when there was a lot of patriarchal, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, stuff going on in the US, and I'm sure everywhere else.
I thought, what? I may be thinking of a different Middle Eastern country, or in a different Arab country, that I thought there was some really great progress and with like women going to school and being able to do all these things. And then suddenly, because of the war, it all got thrown back.
Isn't that Afghanistan?
That's what I was thinking.
Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Where the Taliban took over and they
Okay.
reverted back to their
Yeah.
old ways. Yeah.
Because I remember being surprised by that because I hadn't realized. I'm trying to think. I got a book club and we were reading where one woman's story where she was like suddenly, no more wearing jeans and going to school. It was suddenly she's back in a, in a traditional outfit.
Well, let's jump over to the title poem. I wanted to talk about that a little bit before Shahe joins us. It's on page 78, History of Forgetfulness.
I thought that was gorgeous.
I did too. What did you like about it, Annette?
Oh, I just, I was so happy to finally get the poem, The History of Forgetfulness, because of course, the whole book, you understand why it's called The History of Forgetfulness, but then it's the focus on the mother and her, dementia. And I don't know, it just I think finally, I felt like toward the end, we got poems that really felt humanly deeply connected. And so I think that's why that struck me so much. He's clearly, felt connected to his mother all the way through, but this focus, and I guess it was just kind of like an unfolding I didn't expect. I didn't expect the mother to have memory issues. By then I just thought this is about, remembering and forgetting the war, and the upbringing. It just felt so poignant when I got to that. And then, what was that other one?
The one that's right beside it, 14. Gosh,
Yeah,
that's
14. Uh-huh. Yeah. And then, yeah, 14. Yeah, exactly. When I was glancing at it, I was thinking that was part 2 of the poem, but it's, yeah. So I don't know. I just thought they were beautiful.
Well, and there's the pressure cooker again,
Pressure
which is
cooker
really
again,
interesting. She makes illegal U-turns just to make sure the burner under the pressure cooker
Yeah.
is on. And that's the
Yeah.
same pressure cooker where it was, it was boiling
Yeah.
after she left. Yeah.
And when she closes her eyes, she remembers everything. So she can't sleep. I don't know.
Yeah, it kind of raises the question of, all right, so history of forgetfulness, like what's being forgotten, and even what's been lived through, um, maybe you know some of our humanity or innocence. Certain things are forgotten, and maybe that has something to do with the title of the book, the history of that.
Yeah.
And then also how that is within this long history, the history of war and the history of patriarchy and the history of misusing religion and the whole, the history of history. Because it's like all these cycles. Well, there's that one poem that plays on the word cycles. Which poem was that? It's kind of, Discovery of Cycle on page 23. That's the one where the
menstrual cycle.
Yeah. Now that I was taller, I noticed rags soaking in the plastic wash tub.
Yeah.
And then there's the kind of moment where a little farther down, I don't know the pronunciation of this word, but I looked it up. Inshallah.
Inshallah. Yeah.
Inshallah. If Allah wills it so. And so you've got these cycles. I mean, here's the most ordinary, like female cycle, but then the cycles of other things, cycle of violence, cycle of all,
Right, yeah.
all those kinds of cycles going on, so these human cycles in the midst of, or in contrast to, or even in keeping with, if Allah wills it so.
Yeah. I'm admitting Shahe right now.
Okay.
And so when you talk about those cycles, when I got to number 14, the way that poem ended, she has the number 14 on her left hand written with felt pen. I couldn't help but think about concentration camp, victims with the numbers and so forth. I mean, not that she's been in one, but she's suffered through all of this. And so you do feel that larger human cycle of violence and behavior. And that's where it landed for me in that poem.
Well, y'all, Shahe has joined us. Thank you so much for coming to see us and talking about your book.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me, Sandy, and the rest of you. Thank you for reading the book.
Yeah, we really enjoyed it.
So honored. How's it going?
We wanted to ask you a few questions.
Sure.
I think one thing that we always do when we read these books is we look at the cover and we try to find the relevance of the image on the front to the content of the book. And I think in your thanks, it mentioned Vahe Berberian.
Vahe, Vahe is
the
local painter artist in Los Angeles and a very good friend of mine. So for many years, we've had very close relationship. Not only that, he's also from the same neighborhood in Beirut where I came from. So he knows these poems. He knows what happened, and he's also a writer, and he writes about Beirut and the war in Lebanon. So when I approached him, I said, I would love to put one of your paintings on the cover. He just said, okay, go through my paintings and whatever you connect to. So I picked about 4 or 5 of them, and my publisher actually picked this one.
Okay. Does this have a title? Do you know?
I can't remember that. I know it's in the books, in the section where I have thanked him, or somewhere in the couple of the first few pages. But I just gravitated toward this one because it almost looks like it's a young boy standing on a chair, and also on so many levels. Even the dog looks, it's about to attack. It looks like, for me at least, that's how I look at it.
Right. Yeah.
And then I don't know if you can see it on the cover also. There are like these red things in the sky.
Yeah.
And it almost feels like to me either bullets or
Yeah.
falling bombs, or maybe, I mean, probably that's not what he intended as a painter. But for me, those are the images that really stood out for me. And the darkness of the soil also is very
Yeah.
interesting for me, that it's black, very dark. It's almost charred soil, which is definitely something that I relate to growing up in Beirut.
Right. Yeah, and the expression on the face of the figure
Mhm.
is, you know, I don't know if it's fear, concern, or,
Right.
you know, obviously not happy.
Definitely not happy. And he almost looks like, what's the word? Distraught, or this, in a place where definitely he's not happy.
Right. And wringing
There's
his
definitely
hands, his
sadness.
hands are together.
Mhm.
Yeah, clutched.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's very interesting that he's from the same neighborhood.
Oh, absolutely.
Wow.
I knew if this book ever got published, I knew that I was going to ask him to do something for the book.
That's wonderful.
So this book had a long journey before it actually came out. We talked about that a little bit. These poems were, are they like 20 years old or?
Anywhere from 20 years old all the way to literally a couple of months before the book came out.
Okay.
I always like to read the poem The Last Mosque, because The Last Mosque was probably written one of the first poems that I wrote. And the second part of it is the last poem that I wrote. So if you notice, Last Mosque has part 1 and part 2. Part 1 was written literally 20 years ago. And it almost, we were having a conversation, the publisher and I, and there was this one stanza on one page, because the poem is long.
Yeah.
It's unusually long for what I write. And it just stood there by itself. And I thought, it just doesn't look good, that one stanza sitting there by itself. And I suggested, what if I write a second part to it? And she said, okay, go for it. Let's see what happens. So I like that. I always talk about this because it sort of shows the journey of my writing, how I used to write 20 years ago and what it became as 20 years later as a writer.
Right.
But in that journey, I think 20 years, it's been very interesting for writers who are trying to get their books published. It was very hard for me because I used to always win these competitions, and I was always a finalist and never got into that, And one time I came to the Rockvale.
Yeah.
And, I was trying to look at my manuscript again. I went through it a number of times. I like displayed it on the bed over there, and I'm like looking, if I need to move things around, and then, and I was doing research there too, just to see where to submit myself. And I saw this publisher in the UK, and I've never sent my work in the UK. And I thought, UK, who's gonna, and I just sent it. And right away, she responded, which was so interesting. All these years, I've been trying to get it published in the US. And just this one try in the UK. And it just, right away, she responded to it. And it was such a gracious response that I was, I said, oh, wow, finally somebody understands the book.
Yeah.
So, and a lot of my friends have told me who have published books, they said, the person who gets your book, you will know, they will connect. So, and I'm sure a lot of people who've published, I know Sandy has published in this group, the publisher, when it's the right person, it's like this magical connection. So.
Yeah. And I read in an interview that I don't remember who it was with, that you were thinking that this book would be part of a trilogy, perhaps? Is that still plans?
Still
for
in the
that.
plan. It's the second part is, I don't know if you, toward the end, you realize that we are coming to the new world.
Yes.
We're going to be coming to America. And the second part of the trilogy is growing up, right away picking up from living Beirut in that turmoil and coming to the US as an immigrant boy of 12 years old. And all of a sudden you're in this country where so different and foreign from the place that you came from, and all the mistakes that you make, all the language that becomes a comedy in itself, where you're trying to figure out how to speak this language. Kids making fun of you, and that whole journey going through middle school, high school, and those are like formative years. These are years that,
Sure.
in very powerful years, where as a teenager you're trying to make sense of your being or your sexuality, or everything is happening at that time, and on top of it you're in this brand new world where it's so like you're not hearing bullets going by, there's no bombs exploding, and it's just Jimmy Carter is president. It's a very, very interesting world coming into. So
Do you think the
that,
same press will publish the second?
most probably, I mean, she's very happy with she has told me that out of all the poetry books that they've published, this is the best-selling one that they've had.
Oh, wow.
So,
That's
yeah,
awesome.
so I'm sure she will, but there's a lot of work to be done for the second half. There's quite a few of the poems have been written already, and again, some of them are 20 years old, some of those poems. So hopefully in the next couple of years, the second part will come out.
Great. Well, we'll be on the watch for that.
Thank you.
Well, I have one question, I guess. I'm very taken with the last poem in the book.
Mhm.
And I actually have this book.
Uh-huh.
And I remember when I saw the title of that poem, I said, wait a minute, I think I've got a book by that guy, and went and found it, of course. So, of course, I'm reading this in translation.
Mhm.
So I'm curious if you can read it in the original.
I can't, I mean, again, my Arabic is very weak at this point, because when I left Beirut, Lebanon, I was 12 years old.
Okay.
And right away, when you come to the US, you don't realize this. People, teachers, especially back in the 70s, they're trying to integrate you into the system. And unfortunately, I stopped speaking Arabic because my parents didn't speak Arabic. My parents spoke Armenian. So we stopped speaking Arabic. I didn't have Arab friends in the US, so the language was lost. But however, when somebody talks, for example, when I first met Taha Muhammad Ali, when he was talking to me and he was talking to me in Arabic, I could understand him, but I couldn't respond to him. So I would speak in English, and the translator standing next to him would translate what I said, but then he would speak to me in Arabic. But it was a very magical moment when I met him, when he read, I don't know if you've read the poem by him, Revenge. You have to read that poem. It's on YouTube. He reads it. The year that I visited, what's the poetry festival in New Jersey that they do every year? It's this amazing Dodge. So I was at Dodge, and he read, and you could hear a pin drop, and he's reading in Arabic. No one can understand him, yet you just felt the power of that poem when it was being read, until the translator read in English, and it's one of the most powerful poems I've ever read. It's called Revenge. Write it down somewhere, and just when you have time, listen to it. And listen to the version that he reads in Arabic. And I think it's Cole, the poet, forgot his first name, last name is Cole, that he reads the poem in English, and he translated it.
Peter Cole?
Yep.
Peter Cole?
I think it's Peter Cole.
Yeah, I think he does translations.
Yeah, so please listen to it. And then I went to the backstage. It's not even a backstage because it's a tent, this large circus tent that they did it. So I went outside, I'm trying to look for him, and he just came in front of me. And that conversation, that's the poem, it's pretty much, that's what happened, the conversation. And he knew right away that I'm from the same region of the world. He's from Palestine, or he grew up in Palestine, and I'm from Lebanon. But my dad was born in Haifa, which is in Israel. So I told him my dad is from Israel, my dad's from Haifa, and right away we just connected, and he gave me 2 Arabic books, the poems in Arabic. So I still have those. So it's one of those people that, you know, some people love meeting movie stars. To me, that is nothing. Meeting him.
Yeah, I'll take a poet over a movie star any day.
Oh my God. And I live close to Hollywood, so I still see movie stars, but means nothing, absolutely nothing. So it was great meeting him, and I will never forget him. He passed away a few years back. But the memory, that last poem, I just feel like it's such a powerful way to end this whole section. The idea of burying my father.
Yeah.
And again, it's almost like the first poem talks about me, a person. It's about living. The poem ends with life. You know, it talks to the mother saying, "Your son is alive. You know, he lives." And then it ends with a death. You start with life, and it comes with a full circle into this moment of dying.
But it's also that image of, we'll lay him to rest behind the church, deep in the overgrown lilacs. And given so much of the desolation throughout the book, to end on, you know, a beautiful image of lilacs, you know, color, fragrance. Just a beautiful way to end the book.
Absolutely. And throughout the poem, you feel this. I mean, a lot of readers and writers have commented on the fact that this tumultuous relationship between father and son throughout the whole book, and father and mother. And it's this constant battle that's happening. Not only there's a war going outside, the war has also seeped into the family, where obviously nothing is normal anymore. Everything is upside down. And you feel this tension, you feel this definitely abuse, physical, there's definitely physical abuse happening. There's emotional abuse that's going on throughout the book. And again, the actual violence that's happening outside. Sometimes, you know, that the line blurs, which is worse. The child going through this visual images that sees people dying outside, or the father and the abusive father who's or this very powerful man who's you know, destroying the family life, almost the family unity.
Yeah, well, we really thought the first poem, Educating the Son, was such a powerful, really wonderful way to set the stage for the book. You know, shocking images, but said in a very matter-of-fact, kind of plain-spoken way. And I guess in some ways you kind of get used to I mean, it's horrifying, right? The war and everything, but I think in some of the ways the poems were presented, that it felt like it became ordinary.
Right.
And, you know, like you'd seen so much that there was a shock effect to it for us that were reading it, but it also seemed like spoken in a very, I don't know, matter of fact, like this is the way it is. Here's a sniper bullet, you know, like the bullets are, I don't know.
And the title of it, a friend of mine suggested that I make this the first poem in the book. It wasn't the first poem. For a while, it was buried somewhere in the first half of the book. But she said, you need to move this to the first. And one of the reasons was, yes, it's very powerful. It's very, but the title is Educating the Son. And in very indirectly, it's also educating the reader that we are now going through this schooling. All of us will go through this, because most of us probably have forgotten what happened in Beirut. We maybe have this faint memory that, yes, something happened back in the 70s. There was a civil war, but I mean, almost 40 years have gone by, and people have, obviously the new generation has no idea what this is all about. So the whole book is a sense of educating not only the son, but educating the reader that you're about to go through this journey with the writer that will deal with the Civil War, but that's only almost like that's the backdrop of what is going to happen with some of the poems. If you want, I will read that poem for you, the first poem.
Mhm.
Educating the Son. I got my schooling at the morgue, a summer job my mother thought would keep the streets out of her son. It was a booming business, death. The year was 1975. The Civil War was brewing and morticians needed better help. I was in charge of clipping nails. Old toes and fingers had to look pristine. With rubbing alcohol and cotton balls, I cleaned and washed dry blood from children with no legs, from men who went to work at dawn and never found their way back home, their faces like shoes with no soles. I smiled because I didn't know another way to deal with shock. Some afternoons I sat on slabs of marble, eating feta cheese on moldy bread and watching wives identifying faceless men as mates, and mothers who like doves descended slowly on their sons' decapitated corpses. Then I wondered if my mother would look for me when the evening came. Would she remember that I was her only son and that I cleaned boys my own age? I witnessed death before I could live. Mother, stay awake. Don't look for him among the dead. He lives, he lives, he lives.
Yeah. Then that's the kind of the biblical reference at the end too,
Yes.
right? Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah. I just thought this was a stellar poem.
Thank you. And this
Yeah,
is written,
that's where I got the 1975 was from that poem. Earlier,
Mm.
we were talking about something. I said, I think he was born in 75. No, that's in that poem.
No, yeah. This is also written in meter, by the way.
Yeah.
Yes.
If you realize that.
We talked about that.
This was one of the exercises that we had to do when I was doing my graduate work. And Professor Steele, I don't know if you know Timothy Steele.
Yep.
He is one of the formative poets when it comes to writing in meter and rhyme. And this was a work, one of the poems that I wrote in his class, and he worked with me through it. So I think there are about 4 or 5 poems in this collection that's written in meter. The other one is That Summer is also written in meter.
Mm.
Yeah, he wrote that book, All the Funds and How You Say a Thing.
Yes,
Which is
yes.
really,
Yeah, I
really
was at
good.
school when he wrote that. I
Oh,
was with
wow, okay.
him, so great poet.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Yeah, there's a poem, the title I can't pronounce, but it's a word that means both pity and sin.
Merk. Yeah.
Would you talk a little bit about that and about how the concept of, I'll probably mispronounce, Mech works
yeah.
both ways in that?
Well, I mean, Lebanese Civil War was, part of it is, it's a religious war. It happened between Christians and Muslims. And Armenians being Christian, we grew up in, one of the things that we did Saturdays and Sundays was going to church. And I was an altar boy at some point. Father Simeon this is a story where race almost comes into play. We had an Armenian girl in our group that was very dark skinned because her parents were Egyptian Armenians. So she was very dark, and he was being, again, time is 1970s, and he's being very, Jesus is there to clean our sins, our hearts are black, and then he's showing these cutout images. I don't know if you guys remember this in Sunday school when they had these they used to have these boards on top of
Flannel boards.
yeah, and then they
Oh,
put these
yeah.
images on top of it. And for kids, I mean, for me, that was so impressive, so magical, where you have these images just hanging on and I used to always go behind and look, how did they stick these things? This is like before YouTube and TikTok, I think. So for kids, this was our TikTok, where we just, this was so having these black images saying this is sinful individual, and then having Sylvia starting to cry about feeling maybe she's dirty and sinful. That's the image. That's where it came from. I don't know. It's a poem that I wrote maybe, again, a couple of decades ago, and it's a poem that making there's a lot of religious references throughout the whole book. And that's because of growing up in the church. I mean, that's your formative years. You're learning the Bible, and I am grateful that I learned the Bible at a very young age, because when I was reading American and British literature, it's full of these images of biblical images. And I would look around my classroom sometimes in college, half of those kids had no clue what it was making references to. That's why, like Sandy said, oh, that he lives. It's biblical reference. Most kids will probably not even know what that reference is. So I'm grateful that I learned at a very young age to decipher the Bible, the Old Testament, the New Testament, and it subconsciously just comes into my writing every once in a while.
Yeah. Who else has a question?
Should I read one of the poems?
Well, I want you to read History of Forgetfulness. We all really, really love this poem too. Of course, the title poem.
Right. Let me find it. Sorry about that.
It's on 78 in my book.
Yeah, hold on just 1 second. Page 78. Okay, so let me give you the background on this story. So my mother had dementia, and it's obvious as you guys are reading. I remember when I came into your group, you guys were, I think, discussing the poem about when they wrote numbers on her hand so that she won't forget which room she's in. So she had dementia, and to me, the most miraculous thing about my mom is she started forgetting everything. But one of the most beautiful things that happened, she would remember every poem that she had memorized as a kid. So from childhood. So we would visit her at the convalescent home, and she would sit there trying to figure out who we are, our names. Definitely, she would not remember my daughter's name. But then I would ask her to recite something, and then she would go into this recitation of a 1.5-page poem. And that was, to me, when I teach classes now, when I tell my students the importance of memorizing poetry, it's great that we learn poems, we read poems, but there's a power in this memorization of poetry. And my students do memorize. They have to memorize at least 5-6 poems throughout the school year. And my hope is when they go, in their adult life, they will always play that it will stay in their mind. And a lot of the alumni, when they come back, they always say, I still remember that poem. So it's a great practice. I mean, I've tried it as as you get older, unfortunately, it's harder and harder to memorize these poems. So I challenge you to
Oh, really?
start short.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Of course.
but start short. I still do it. I try to memorize something. I try short poems, William Carlos Williams poems, where
Yeah.
these tight short poems. It's a mental exercise. So, but
You memorized Patterson? Wow, that's pretty impressive.
Last summer at the Sewanee Writers Conference, we had to memorize a poem and recite it to our workshop. And I'm 63. I'll be 64 tomorrow. It was terrifying,
Yep.
but I did it. And I felt very accomplished because when I was young, I memorized things all the time and it was practically effortless, But it was excellent.
So yeah, that's why I think a lot of people ask me, where did you get your poetic which genes is it? It's definitely my mother's side, where she constantly would recite poetry in our home, and 99% of the poems that she had memorized were in Armenian. So History of Forgetfulness is when she was first starting to deal with dementia, and the poem is very straightforward, just tells us how the forgetting started, the history of her forgetfulness. She might finally forget my name when she's dicing onions on a chopping block. For now, mother can't pinpoint my daughter's birthday. She recites random months like January and August until I remind her it's in July. She forgets to swallow her blood pressure pills, so she leaves church early. After she calms her heart, she drinks Turkish coffee. No one knows why she clips coupons for Campbell's tomato soup. She makes illegal U-turns just to make sure the burner under the pressure cooker is off. She can't sleep at night because when she closes her eyes, she remembers everything.
Yeah, that last line.
Beautiful.
Thank you. That last line, my my students this year memorized poems from this book, and my daughter memorized this one. She was in my class this year, and she always says that last line, that last line, and she's 12, and she gets the power of that last line. That grandma would remember everything, even though she acted that she forgot everything, or sometimes maybe she wanted to forget things. She was also a survivor of the war and abuse, so she probably wanted to forget some things, but when she closed her eyes at night, or she didn't close her eyes, because a lot of time when I went by her room, she wasn't sleeping, she was wide awake. Yeah, that's where that came from. And I remember I read that poem a few years back, and again, a friend of mine came up to me and said, that should be the title of your book.
Wow.
So
You've got good friends. They've given you.
I think that another moral of the story is listen to friends who you trust, especially a lot of our friends are they're poets, they're people who read books, they love books. So listen to them. They sometimes they guide you, and you have to be awake and aware that they're telling you something. Any other questions? How many of you remember the war in Lebanon or the Civil War? You guys remember? Yeah. It sort of like when I came to the US, the year that we came in, it was the thing on the news was the hostages in Iran.
Yeah.
That was the big thing. So when we came, no one was talking about the war in Lebanon, because the hostages was every night. There was that count. It's the 225th day.
Yeah.
That I remember. And even though my English wasn't great, I remember my father would sit there and watch the news every night. Cronkite was, telling us what was happening. So yeah.
So you put little sprinkles of humor kind of dark humor in some of the poems, especially in the second section.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, like, my background is also theater. I did a lot of improv and
Oh.
with friends, and that I think humor came from that. When you're doing improv, it's rare that you can stay in character and be serious all the time. So comedy is so much part of doing improv. So a lot of that I think definitely seeped into my writing, because again, to be honest with you, whenever I used to read this, and the reason I should think this book is never getting published because it's so dark and it's so heavy, and um, whenever I started reading the manuscript, halfway through I would just put it away and say, I can't do this. This is too dark. But so I guess subconsciously I started writing, or I had to sprinkle humor, like you said, just so that it's palatable. It's you can sort of digest some of this heaviness to it.
Right,
Uh,
yeah.
yeah, I think it's done so intentionally at places where it became too dark and heavy. But again, you can't escape from the reality of growing up. Remember, this is a kid who's 7, 8, 9 years old, and they're growing up in this place where they're trying to make sense of why people are killing each other, because religion doesn't make sense to you at that age. Why would somebody kill for religion?
Yeah.
You're trying to make sense of that. Why is um, mom and dad fighting so much? That you're trying to make sense of it. Yeah, I mean, one of the most dark moments, I think it's in the book, is when my brothers and I were by ourselves at home, and we heard guns being fired, and they used to do that a lot when they were either celebrating or someone who was recently was killed. So we rushed to the balcony, which is the stupidest thing you can do. Now that I think back, we hear gunfire, where people are firing guns. The last thing you want to do is run to the balcony. But we ran to the balcony because, oh, something's happening outside. And we saw this, there were militiamen walking middle of the street, and there was a Mercedes pulling a man from its leg. That image, and I'm thinking, I was 7, 8 years old. My younger brother was 5. So a 5-year-old, a 7, 8-year-old, and a 11-year-old, my older brother, we're watching this thing as if it's a film or a cinema, where this man, you sort of like detach yourself from it, but
Right.
it's the reality of this is what growing up in a war means. So that image, I cannot shake it.
We talked a little bit about that use of the word cinema and the frequency with which it appears, and
Absolutely.
how in some ways that's that's a detached reality that you're watching, but in the midst of what happens in the book, it's another kind of cinematic, I guess.
Absolutely. That the word cinema, you're right. It appears that I talk about a lot of films, references to films, and to me that was my cinema. That was what I was watching, and I remember one of my teachers, Ron Kirchi. I don't know if you know Ron Kirchi's work as a poet. Uh, Great poet in California, in Los Angeles. He was my teacher at Pasadena City College. And one of the things he would tell us always, and that just stuck with me, he said, every line of your poem has to be filmable. You have to be a camera. If a line, oh, there it is.
There's
Yep.
one of his books.
Mm-hmm. If you cannot film that line, that's a weak line. So for me, I thought, wow, every single line that I write, the camera has to be able to capture it. So from that, college years, I started writing poems that every line, if somebody wanted to make this poem into a movie, it should be fairly easy to do. They should be able to know what color it is. They should be able to do the size, what kind of car it is. They should never guess the type of a car. They should never guess the type of a flower. It should be very specific, that like the lilacs, they should know what color they are. So that has that stayed with me, Ron Kirchi's words. So it becomes sort of a cinema. This whole book is a film that we're watching. And the same thing that I'm working on with my second book, it's very similar. It is a story of a young immigrant boy growing up in Los Angeles. And it could be a film if you short films, they're vignettes. But on the other hand, going to the movies with my mom was a treat. Like going, she would take us to all these great movies, and I had no idea what the titles of these movies were. We just went in, and many years later, I'm in the US and I'm watching Zeffirelli's Romeo and Juliet on TV. I don't know if you've seen that one. That's the first Romeo and Juliet that was this powerful. And I'm watching this and I keep telling my wife, I've seen this movie somewhere. And I kept watching it. And I go, wait a minute. This is the movie I went to see with my mom. And she took me to a Shakespearean film in Beirut. I as a kid, I had no idea what it was that I was watching, but obviously it left an impression on me. And then I just thought, Mom, you took me to a Shakespeare movie. So that I remember going to the movies with my dad to see Jaws for the first time, and that's like I mean, imagine this 10-year-old kid going to the movies and seeing Jaws for the first time. And you know, the underwater and the cellos of the music, and then the bombs exploding outside, and you can't tell if it's the sound from the movie that's disturbing you or the sound from outside. So yeah, those are moments that and that continued to happen when I came to the US. Now, coming to America and watching all these great films in the movie theater, that also has been amazing journey for me. And to this day, my wife works for the Academy Awards. So
wow.
year, she goes to the Academy Awards and we like try to find her in the audience
Cool.
as a filler. So,
Well, wrapping up,
Anyway,
Shahe, do you have a favorite? Do you have a favorite book and poem in this book? Something that you like, especially how it works, or
can somebody repeat that?
say what?
Is that a favorite poem that I like? Is that what you asked?
Yes. Uh-huh.
The poem. I love The Last Mosque, and I would love to read that for you.
Yes, please do.
And the reason I like that, there's so many obvious reasons. Again, this is the first time that we are losing a friend as we are playing hide and go seek. And the beauty about this poem is that it's in a mosque that's happening. And remember, I said I grew up as a Christian boy, and the mosque was right behind our house. So Beirut was this beautiful city before the war where Christians and Muslims and Jews, everyone lived together in a same neighborhood. But when the war started, the Muslims left our community. So they left this empty mosque right behind our house, right behind there used to be railroad tracks. Right next to the railroad tracks, there was this mosque, abandoned, nothing in it. So you have these teenagers, young kids going in there and playing hide and seek. I mean, can you imagine playing hide and seek in a mosque? So this is the story behind the setting, but what it develops there is very horrific. So I would like to read this poem, The Last Mosque. 1. When we heard the planes approach from the distance, Avo yelled in Armenian, "You guys, come out, the planes." He couldn't finish his sentence. We heard the first bomb explode near the bridge. I slid behind the curtain that smelled of mildew and urine. I didn't want to come out. The stained windows rattled. During hide and seek, they always targeted me first. I didn't want to be found. "Come out," Avo yelled. "I'm not playing anymore." No one moved. In this abandoned house of worship, All 5 of us found a corner. Allah will protect us, I thought. Bombs won't destroy a minaret. Avo kept begging, guys, come out, please. It's not funny anymore. No one moved. The explosion set off sirens and car alarms. Allah is with us. Allah is with us. The mosque was our hiding place, even though I was a good Christian boy. The final explosion silenced everything, even Avo's voice. 2, crossing the tracks, I held his left shoe. The canvas green and faded, mold on the bloody toe. The search party wanted to find pieces of Avo, his threadbare socks, shorts the shade of the Mediterranean, brown belt with tiny cowboys on it. On the telephone wire, I mistook the ragged Lebanese flag for his 1010 t-shirt. A broken Coke bottle reminded me of his reading glasses. In the blur of sunlight, a dead cat resembled his fisherman's hat. We ended the search when we found a trail of killer ants, a satchel of marbles, and a wet wallet with 3 lira stuck to a photo of Saint Charbel.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah. Again, not to make light of it, it's very cinematic. You can actually take a camera and go through this, kids playing in a mosque, and then the search party going out to look for Avo by the railroad tracks, the cowboy on the belt,
Yeah.
those little details that in a film you can just see a camera just panning on the
Yeah.
belt or
Wonderful.
the shoe.
Yeah.
There is a short film of the first part of this poem, right?
Say that again.
There is a film, or somebody made
Yes.
a short film of the first. It doesn't include the second part of the poem, which
No,
you said
it's the,
you wrote much later anyway. But the first part,
it's an animation film.
Yeah.
A friend of not a friend actually. There was a competition back, I think about 5 years ago, where they partnered poets with filmmakers, and this was and I sent in, I would say, a dozen poems, and she picked this one to film or make animation. And I thought she did a great job of making this into a short film.
That's cool. Very cool.
Okay.
Well, I think that's probably it for tonight. Thank you so much for joining us, Shahe. It's good to see
Thank you,
again.
Jeff, and everybody else. Thank you so much. Thank you for doing this.
Yeah.
And which book are you reading next?
We're reading Jay Hopler's Still Life.
Oh, wow. Yes. Excellent.
That's what
Thank you,
we're doing
guys.
next.
I really, really appreciate this.
Well, good luck in the trilogy. We'll be looking out for book 2.
Hopefully I can come back to Rockvale and work on.
Yeah, I would love that. That'd be cool.
For sure.
All right.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye. Well, he was delightful.
Yes.
Yes.
All
Yeah,
right. So go ahead, Jeff.
I was just going to say that that's interesting, the hide and seek in the mosque, and then there's so much of the hide and seek out in the streets away from the sniper. It's a different kind. It's a much more, kind of ominous hide and seek.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So our next, we're going to do Jay Hopler, Still Life on date 20th, September 20th.
Or 20.
I'll put that on the Facebook page too.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Thanks for
Thank
showing
you.
up, guys, and for participating tonight. Everybody have a good month.
I enjoyed the book. Thank you.
See y'all.
Take
Good
care.
night.
Good night.
You can stop recording.